one's pretty good. Just that, I think. It could be. It's been mighty hard to park. To order.
Oh, thank you. My name is Ed C. Judd, and I live in the Longmont Greens subdivision. My home is 1.1 miles to the north of the center of runway 11. We do not live under a traffic pattern that I know of, and we have not, in 36 years, ever had a problem with the Longmont Airport. We've never had a problem with the skydivers, never had a problem with fly-ins, air shows, or anything else. We've been good neighbors, and as far as we're concerned, the airport's been good neighbors to us. For 36 years, we lived peacefully. However, beginning in about April of this year, that changed. And the way it changed is that aircraft, which I believe belong to flying schools, two of which are resident here and others in Broomfield, have been flying outside the noise abatement pattern consistently every day from perhaps 6 a.m. in the morning, essentially first light, until after nightfall. The heights that they're flying over the airport are from 300 to 500 feet, sometimes lower. And so I came here this evening to discuss with you the voluntary noise abatement, which I think is on your agenda anyway. You're all familiar with the map. And this is the map that was negotiated as part of the plan on September 14th of 2011. And that procedure required, and the expectation was that aircraft would fly a tight left downwind pattern within a quarter to a half mile of the runway. And that's pretty much what I understand would be a normal pattern. I once took flying lessons myself. I did touch and go landings, but that was a long time ago. I'm pretty good at estimating aircraft heights. I was a skydiver, and in my youth, which I guess is 1968 at this point, I was the ground safety officer for the Fort Benning Sport Parachute Club. So I estimated the height of a lot of aircraft. At any rate, we see these aircraft coming over in peak periods once every 3 minutes, sometimes once every 1 minute. You can walk out of my house, look down Twin Peaks Circle to the east, and you can see them stacked up coming in. And I got to tell you, it's unsafe. And so I'd like to show you some photos. That is the roof of my house, and that is an aircraft, which I think is 250 feet above my house. There is another aircraft. That's my house again, but it's a different aircraft. This is N1774T. It's owned by Flight Operations Aircraft, Inc., an aircraft which when I looked it up online, has a registration that expired on January 31st, 2004. The way I get the tail numbers of the aircraft is that I photograph the planes. And when I photograph the planes, I can then blow them up enough to see the tail numbers. There are a number of aircraft that are continuing problems, and they all appear to be in some way connected with the flight schools. I can show you another here. N6271J. It's owned by GM Aircraft out of Wheatridge. Here's, I think, one that you might recognize. The neighbors and I call it Dirty Belly. And Dirty Belly is recognizable because of the carbon and oil emissions that are on the underside of the fuselage from the engine exhaust. This is N737JR. It's owned by Aerosphere, Inc., and they reside at Hangar 31A in Longmont. And there are many flights, uncountable numbers of flights by Dirty Belly. Here's one you might know better. This is N75775, owned by Rocky Mountain Aircraft Services, LLC, doing business as Western Air Flight Academy out of Broomfield. Why you might recognize that tail number, other than that it flies routinely low over my house, is that very same aircraft is upside down in a field here after having crashed. When I calculated, this was on the downwind leg, it had passed over my house less than a minute before it crashed. If it had had engine failure a minute and 30 seconds earlier, it might have come down on top of my house or along a row of houses all along Twin Peaks Circle where it routinely flies.
You're about out of time. Could you do me a favor and give us your house number? Well, we have another opportunity, so stay for that if you'd like. And then can you give us your house number, your full address?
1213.
1213.
Twin Peaks Circle.
And then, just to clarify, that plane was on departure when he was unable to continue his takeoff and landed at the far end. He was on departure. It wasn't on landing.
You must know this best, but it's described differently in the accident reports that are on the internet. There is one accident report that says it was on takeoff.
Yes, he was on takeoff.
But there are multiple other accounts that say it was on landing. I'll come back and talk with you.
Okay, yeah, we have a second opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Say again? 1213 Twin Peaks Circle. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Good evening, team. Matt Menza, 2235 Parkview Drive, Longmont, Colorado. Yeah, I'm a professional pilot going on 30 years. Moved here and started flying out of the airport in 2018. just want to let the community know and you guys know that as a professional pilot, from military instructor, combat aviator, commercial airline pilot, instructor pilot, for going on 7 years, there's nothing that I've seen or witnessed out at that airport, and I'm out there weekly, that is not done in accordance with FAA rules, in accordance with the standards. It's a highly regulated activity, and it's done appropriately. In my 7 years of flying here, I've never seen any issues out at that airport. When people claim that they're low-flying aircraft, the only time I've seen low-flying aircraft are in accordance with the rules, taking off and landing, departing and landing on the runways. Everybody seems to be following the rules. Now, the idea that you can fly a tight pattern at a quarter mile or half a mile is absurd, because no airplane can do that here because of winds and environmental conditions which preclude the airplane from flying that kind of pattern. So that's not a realistic expectation, because the airplane's physically, the laws of physics will not allow it to turn inside and make an appropriately safe landing. So they're typically further out than that. And that distance changes based off the performance and the weight of the aircraft and the speed that it flies us down one leg. So there's a lot of misunderstandings from the public about what happens out of the airport. But from my professional opinion, after 7 years, I have not seen any consistent lack of issues in terms of flight discipline or flying in accordance with the regulations, because I'm pretty much a stickler at that. I'm a professional pilot. I was a safety officer in my squadrons. I was a rule guy. I was a book guy. I was a tactics instructor. People better follow the rules, because that's critical. And I do not see any systemic issues out here at the airport. Another thing that's important to note is that the traffic out at the airport is basically the same as it was when I was in here 2018. COVID, obviously, things weren't hopping. The traffic patterns get busy based off of, if the weather's great and the winds are calm, people are going to go out flying. If it's not, you're going to see less people flying. So it ebbs and flows month to month depending on the weather. But overall, it's been pretty much the same. And it's important to note that flight schools are going to come here and practice touch and goes like they do everywhere else up and down the Front Range, because that's what we do in order to get professional pilots trained so they can go out in the real world and fly people from A to B. If you take an a flight out of Denver to somewhere else in the country, thank the pilot. Thank the small airports that trained them. Thank people that are in aviation for getting your family, your butt, safely from point A to point B. And they do that at airports like this. They train professionals at airports like this. And this is a great place to train. It's a great airport. And what people are doing out there is in accordance with the regulations, and it's totally appropriate, and it's totally acceptable, and there's nobody violating rules or doing anything inappropriate. So the claim that somebody's flying over a house at 200 feet in a place that they're not supposed to be is completely absurd. We are doing things correctly out there. And if somebody loses power on a takeoff, that was a textbook situation where the individual landed that airplane safely in the field and walked away. Nobody got hurt. That was perfect. It happens. One of the safest airports in the state is Longmont, Colorado. One of the safest airports in the state. Let's keep that in mind. We're doing things right here. It's a great airport. Let's keep supporting it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Scott?
Chair Melinda, rest of the Airport Advisory Board, Scott Stewart, 229 Grant Street. Sorry I don't have this all together. I'll do what I usually do, which is freelance it. AOPA talking points are interesting to listen to. Airport is a vital part of a thriving community. I'm sure that can be true depending on where the airport is located and what community it is serving. Longmont is not a remote village in the middle of nowhere. That depends on an airport to bring in the goods for the existence of the town. Longmont Airport was built in a time when we had heroes coming home from war. It was also a time when aviation captured the imagination of a nation. The airport back then ran at a financial deficit, and until the FAA started providing funding, the airport couldn't afford to improve without the FAA funding. The airport today relies heavily on grant funding and even utilizes services provided by taxpayer dollars. Along with the FAA funding comes obligations that are supposed to be met. In other words, we're supposed to be able to maintain the asset that the FAA paid for. We're supposed to maintain it for 20 years. The airport is not maintaining those reserve funds. Let me talk a little bit about civility. Threats against the aviation community are entirely inappropriate. The aviation community seems to think that the community surrounding is not worthy of a voice. I hear things like tiny minority, small minority, bowing to the few, childish concepts, hypersensitive. I don't condone anybody who's made a threat against the airport. I think we can, from the airport community, we can speak a little bit more appropriately about the community that we're supposed to be serving with that airport. Here comes the freelance part. Things that I heard at the city council meeting. Flight activity up less than 2%. Look at the numbers. We're over 120. We've never been over 120 in years. And that was even before the year end. We got the worst FBO, overpriced fuel. Honestly, if you're a pilot and you're not buying fuel at our airport and you're not supporting your own airport, you're doing it as disservice. We talk about the fuel taxes and the revenue coming in from fuel as something great. It's less than $20,000 a year. It doesn't move the needle. So the majority of your funding actually comes from land lease rates for the hangars. I'm hearing complaints about crew cars. We don't have crew cars. We need the city council to support the airport. I don't know if you guys know, but the city council is supporting it financially and has been doing it for years. There's been times when the city council is actually, we do a 50% discount for the administrative transfer fee. There's times when it's been 75% because the airport didn't have the ability to pay for what the services it was utilizing. I heard thousands use the airport daily. Just look at the counts. There's not thousands of people flying into this airport. Look at the car counts that come in. There's not thousands. You get a lot of people for the jump plane on the weekend for sure, but the over-exaggeration that's coming from the aviation community is a little bit absurd. I'm hearing requests for longer runway, new FBO, more hangars, fuel tanks, restaurant, convention center. All these things cost money. Where's it coming from? Are we really looking for handouts in order to create something? If we build it, they will come. Hub for wildfire mitigation. Planes aren't based here. They're at Rocky Mountain. When a wildfire happens, they don't come in and out of here. Yeah, we invite them here to train on occasion, but they're not coming out of here. St. Verlaine Valley School District built their own aircraft at the Vance Brand Airport. Somebody's misguided. That aircraft came to the air show on a trailer so that students could show the aviation community what they were working on. That airport went back to the St. Verlaine Valley School District and was built in the classroom. It's an exaggeration at best. It's a lie at worst. If you really want to see the NASA reports, because we were talking about flights, no dangerous flights ever happen here, go look at the NASA reports. These are reports that pilots can do anonymously. They'll tell you what's happening at the airport. One person's recollection of what they saw is not it. Go to the reports. We need better data. If you guys are such an economic driver for the city, provide that data. I spoke at the city council meeting, 22, 23. 4 transient aircraft were at Longmont Airport in those 2 years. We're representing that everybody's coming here and they're going to spend money and they're going to stay in our hotels and they're going to do that. Create something that's accountable so that you guys can actually show it and not just come up with some number out of the blue that you can't back up. It's not being back up. You should be able to show the data. Traffic hasn't changed. Sorry. That's all I got. I appreciate your time, and thanks for all your efforts. I know this isn't easy.
Thank you. Have I got anybody else? Go ahead.
John Grunsfeld, 229 Airport Road, airport business owner. I'm sorry I'm late. Just came back from Centennial Airport. I had to bring my airplane down there for maintenance. Last month, I visited 18 airports across the U.S. and the Caribbean on business. And by far and away, Longmont is the most sorry airport that I visited, including 4 in Alaska, towns of a few hundred people. During maintenance break today, I ate at the Perfect Landing. I had to wait 10 minutes to get to a seat at the bar, which is where folks without reservations go. I asked the manager. He said their restaurant is full every day, 250 seats, and they make a lot of money. And it's really nice to be able to sit and watch the planes take off and land. Now, admittedly, Centennial is a much larger airport, but I'll bet that if Longmont were to allow development at the Vance Brand Longmont Airport, we could make Longmont a much more integral part of the community. We could attract somebody who would be willing to put a restaurant into a terminal building. And oh, by the way, the FAA is more than willing, and in fact, it's their charter to pump tens of millions of dollars into the Longmont Airport. I visited airports, again, like Yakutat, Alaska, where the FAA is constantly improving that airport. There are multiple sources of fuel. There's a restaurant. There's a fishing lodge on the airport. I mean, really remarkable for a town of just a few hundred people. And yet, here in Longmont, a rich community, a vibrant community, a community with a, incredible St. Vrain walkway and recreational opportunities and a big golf course and all kinds of other things. And as far as back as I can find, we've never gotten significant FAA funding for any improvements. And I really appreciate all of you spending your time volunteering to be on the Airport Advisory Board. And in the previous iteration of the board, when there was a crisis, a safety crisis, Harrison Earl, as the chair, did write a strongly worded letter to the city. But I'd love to see this board be a little more activist to support the community by asking the city council to support the airport, to allow Levi, and to enable him with some support to write grants for federal funding to improve the Longmont Airport. And when we do that, to the previous gentleman's statement, you'll see a lot more economic activity, as is documented in detail by the State of Colorado Department of Transportation Aviation Department and the consultants they hired. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Go ahead.
Hey, Melinda. Hey, E.K. Greif, 6024 St. Vrain Road, Longmont. Hey, I'd like to propose something to the board. I would like to know if the board would be able to form a group of local pilots, a group of locals from the community, Levi, Councilmember Popkin, and anybody else from the board that wanted to join, and somebody from the FAA. My proposal is we sit down and have an open discussion about the issues we have at the airport. I believe the local pilots have some safety concerns. I think some of them do anyway. And we all know that some of the local community have noise concerns and disruptive concerns. We go to council meetings, we come here, we complain, you don't want to hear it, we don't want to be here, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere. It's really all about what the community is the flight schools that just come, use our runway, and leave. The answer is always we can't do anything about it because of the FAA. And I'm not sure that's true. I honestly believe the FAA cares about the community. And I've got some points I'd like to read that are on the website. Yes, the Federal Aviation Administration does consider the impact of aviation activities on local communities, though its primary mandate is safety and efficiency of the national airspace. That said, community concerns, especially about noise, environmental impact, and airport development, are on the FAA's radar. The FAA supports Part 150 noise compatibility programs, which helps airports work with communities to mitigate aircraft noise. They may recommend flight path recommendations, operational changes. The FAA holds public meetings and invites feedback. In some regions, like around major airports, roundtable groups are formed for ongoing dialogue between the FAA, airports, airlines, and community members. The FAA does not regulate flight frequency, airline scheduling, or some local airport decisions. Those fall under local airport or airport authority control. The FAA is concerned with keeping local communities informed and reasonably happy, especially regarding noise and environmental impact. So all I'm saying is let's stop complaining to each other. Let's bring the community together for both the good of the airport and the good of the community. Let's embrace the airport as the community, and let's all get together and stop fighting over some silly things. Let's sit down and talk about it like human beings and try to solve some of our problems that make these guys happy, that make us happy. We all live here together in this community. We all go to the same grocery stores. We all go to the rec center. We do things together. Let's come together and try to solve our problems instead of bitching and moaning about them and then not getting anywhere. I implore you, let's do something together. These guys want to grow the airport. We want to make everybody happy. Let's do it together. So my suggestion is let's form a group if we can and have an open dialogue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody left? You want to talk? You're the only one left. Now you've got to speak.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Kornreich, Jeremy with a G and Kornreich with a K. I'm at 809 Bittersweet Lane, and I'm here tonight because I'm an applicant for the vacant airport advisory member chair space seat. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here and having this, and thank you to all of you for the disparate opinions and input. As I said in my interview with you and you and you, that there's a lot of communities that need to be balanced here. And if anyone has any questions for me, I'm certainly available. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Anybody else? Last call? And we do have a second public invited to be heard shortly. Next up is approval of the May 8th minutes. And I just had name spelling. Dan might have noticed his. I did give those.
Okay, I've never heard it before.
So it was Rick Vassilier correcting his name, and then Dan Meester, and that was in the motions where his name was misspelled. And I went ahead and turned those in. Go ahead, do you want to?
Line 36.
Stand by. There you go.
Line 36, reads board member moved Dean. You should be reading as board member Dean moved for approval. And a motion for approval. Seconded by Vice Chair Meester. And then page 2, line 36, I got a different name again. Not that I'm concerned.
Thank you. And then Sundance on the last page is just one word for Sundance, but that's not critical. Did anybody else see any changes to the minutes outside of that? No? All right. May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That approves our minutes, and I've got those signed for you, Kayla. Next up is updates from the airport manager.
All right. Let me grab my notes here. Right. Airport updates. A couple hot topic issues out at the airport. Pavement rehab is unfortunately ongoing. That project, which began in early May, was supposed to last 2 weeks, and that's mid-June now. So something we're still struggling with. I was on the phone with the contractor, I should say the engineers today. They kind of acknowledged that the contractor's having some struggles. They had some walk-offs, they had some work issues. They now have a new subcontractor who's supposed to be coming in Saturday, who's promised to finish up the work a little more quickly. So we'll see how that goes. Side note, I did also touch base with them to make sure that they would have the ramp cleared for the pancake fly-in on the 21st. So it shouldn't be an issue for that. Anyway. Continuing to work on the airport AWAS. The engineers, the mechanics for that are supposed to be out within the next couple weeks. They're currently working with the FAA to make sure they get approval to do the phone line repairs like they want to. As a quick reminder for everyone on that one, I think we talked about this last month. But has an old landline on the AWAS, which the phone company is no longer willing to go out there and support. So we're trying to transition that over into a cellular repeater in a manner that is acceptable to the Federal Aviation Administration. All right. Additional updates. I just got back, and if I sound tired, it's because I just got back yesterday from the AAAE conference in Atlanta, Georgia. Excellent conference this year. I got to spend a lot of good time in the one-off meetings concerning GA airports. I got to speak with a lot of people in industry. I got to participate in the GA roundtable. We talked about unleaded fuel issues. We talked about voluntary noise abatement issues. We talked about the FAA's new option for deregistering aircraft. We had good conversations with it regarding all that. I also had an opportunity to meet and have lunch with the owner of Vector Plane Pass system that does the revenue connections for airports. So I got some more good information from him. So good conference, a really good conference with some good things accomplished for that. Any questions on any of that so far? I keep forgetting to pause.
Hey Levi, in regards to the pavement rehab,
Mm-hmm.
we good? Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Pavement rehab. Originally, that contractor was going to be there 3 weeks. 2 weeks, okay. And, I mean, he was 3 weeks on the first of 3 sections, or maybe even a little bit more. Is the airport incurring any additional costs?
No, via the nature of the agreements that we have with that contractor, as to my understanding, with most agreements that the city enters into for projects like that, that was known as liquidated damages, which protects them in that case. So essentially says, here's the the contractors, here's a quote we give you. If it's more than that, we're responsible for that. So that's to my understanding, and that is being addressed by the city. So no, it's at no additional cost to us.
Okay, good.
Anything else before I move on? Good? All right. Next thing moving forward, I'm going to kind of tie this into information items, the noise abatement program, and some of my updates here. So we'll kind of roll into that. May 29th, participated in the Front Range voluntary noise abatement program / procedures meeting, which was Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport. That went incredibly well. We pretty much had representatives from all the Front Range airports, all the flight schools, most of the FBOs. So a very good turnout. There's only one flight school off the top of my head, Independence Aviation, that didn't show up, and it's hard to get those guys to go in anything. So it very well. It went very, very well. Some great information. They went over everybody's voluntary noise abatement procedures. We traded handouts. We had conversations. It was a great meeting. I'll pause on that one. Any questions regarding the voluntary noise abatement meeting?
Did you have any luck with your discussions with flight schools on calming down the air traffic at Longmont?
It's specific, and much to calming down. The terms calming down, or
Well, what I'm saying is we've had complaints that one aircraft's doing 30 touch and goes.
well, that's actually something that was addressed in the voluntary noise abatement program. In fact, I think now, if I recall correctly, and of course I'd want to reference this, I think all of the voluntary noise abatement procedures and or plans actually recommend a certain number of touch and goes. Ours certainly does. I know Rocky Mountains does. I'd have to look at the other airports off the top of my head. But yes, there are recommendations regarding that.
Okay.
Yep.
If I'm assuming this checklist is.
Yeah, and I'll be getting that,
meeting.
here in a second.
How widely is this being circulated?
How wide is what being
How
circulated?
widely is that being circulated? I mean, it's not just between Longmont and BJC.
What are we talking about?
The
being circulated?
checklist itself.
Oh, this? Oh, no, this is an internal document.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
That's a different issue.
okay, thanks.
Yep. Anything else on the voluntary noise abatement meetings? All right, moving on. Right after that, June 5th, we did top 5 meetings. So that was a meeting for airport managers, Front Range, so Boulder, Rocky Mountain, Longmont, Erie, and Centennial. So we did that meeting. Good meeting. Honestly, it was so close to the heels of voluntary noise abatement program meeting that it kind of felt like the same meeting. We did cover some things in there that I will kind of roll into, and kind of the main one being, and Melinda has it sitting next to her, the launch of the Good Neighbor Award, and she wants to pass that back and forth. So we did launch this month the Good Neighbor Award. This initiative that we've been talking about doing for quite a while, over a year now here. It took us a while to actually get the awards made. But it's something which was announced in the last newsletter as part of our initiative to promote the voluntary noise abatement procedures. We've decided to take quarterly recommendations for a Good Neighbor Award, essentially a pilot which embodies, good spirit, positive attitude towards the flying community and the rest of the community, and, helps drive forward the voluntary noise abatement procedures. The first recipient of that was Spencer, who flies for Aerosphere. He was kind enough to go to that voluntary noise abatement procedures meeting with me down in Rocky Mountain. He was eager. He drove all the way down. He was engaged in it. He brought information back here from other flight schools regarding other airports, voluntary programs. So he is the first recipient of that, and he did get the first award coin the other day. All right. Any questions on that? Good. And that kind of rolls into that last item I got there sitting in front of you. Kind of in our, as we move forward, as we're trying to continually do more and more, what can we do to get the noise about the voluntary noise abatement procedures out there? One of the things we're doing, just as kind of a, keep ourselves accountable, is I created a checklist for the flight schools on the airfield here. Real quick checklist, and you can kind of see it there in front of you. Essentially just encouraging the flight schools, or perhaps encouraging isn't the proper word, kind of laying out, if you will, to the flight schools how they might perhaps best move forward with implementing or teaching the voluntary noise abatement procedures in their flight schools. I'm going to ask probably for these yearly from the flight schools. The idea is to get, as they have turnover there, certainly with their chief pilots and stuff like that, at least get this in front of every chief pilot so they can see and they can read through this and they can kind of understand it. Not that they don't either, not that they're not participating in other meetings, but just as something else, a little touch base, and something to give us some record onto that, that they have actually gone through this, they've thought about it, and, they've made a record of what they're doing to help out. Any questions on this document?
I'd just add that this is a good post when somebody's soloed, You know, you have to take your exam for the field that you're going to solo at. And this could be once, say they soloed at BJC, and now they're going to start doing solo flight, that would be the appropriate time for this when they're starting to venture to other airports.
Yeah, and again, this isn't for individual students.
Right, but
This is for the flight school itself. So I would hope that the chief pilot would be flying on the side. Now, when he's, integrating that information to his students, that there's a little more discretion on when he does that, but you can see, a suggestion here, include the Vance Brand Voluntary Noise Abatement Program as part of your official flight training syllabus if applicable. So if you have an organization which requires a flight training syllabus, try to have that involved in there. So that might be in the location prior to solo.
Yeah, that would be, or post-solo when you start to venture to other airports.
Yeah.
And they do leave there to get away from the tower and go to the neighboring airports. So I could see that being a valuable part of that next step for new soloing pilots to learn it quickly. And that what we're talking about at our airport isn't any different than what they're talking about at BJC, FNL, Greeley, Erie, all the other airports. So we're not unique in needing to do a better job educating and just reminding people, when you're in the air, you got your only thing you're looking at the ground for is ground reference. You're not looking at cars or schools or people's homes or any of those things. And so it does, to keep it top of mind, I think seems to be from the public comment, and that we are actively working on this, and that is one way to get some traction with it is just continue to repeat it and get it down to the actual pilot who's out venturing to other airports. So this is good. This is comprehensive, brings it to mind. And again, for the Front Range airports that you're talking to, they've also got neighbors, and so it applies to all of them. And this is more robust than any of those have. I've seen a sign at Metro on the fence, but there's no education material.
And to brag a little bit, it's my goal to be the most comprehensive noise abatement program, certainly in Colorado, if not in the United States. And I think we're fairly close as far as how, if you read, particularly if you go through, I don't have a copy of it now, if you go through our communication plan, which, by the way, is a rare thing for an airport to even have that. If you go through that communication plan and look at the things that we're individually doing compared to other airports, we're pretty on top of it.
We do have a good community, and we have opportunities because of the size of our community. We do get together for events and EAA and stuff at the airport and see each other at the airport. So I do feel like we have a little bit better line of communication, but again, I think we agree that the overall discussion isn't necessarily germane to our pilots on the field. The pilots that are based here, it's the transient pilots and people that are new to the area and check the NOTAMs for all kinds of things, but don't necessarily look at the VNAP. My comment to that, and a couple of my speakers stepped out, I'd like them to hear it, that we are working on this. This is something we're actively working on. Levi does have the most robust noise plan in the state. He is going to the other airports. He is speaking to the instructors and getting the word out. So it may not look like anything's changing, and it does take a while to see change and to see that happen. And old habits die hard. If you've got somebody who's used to flying a really fat pattern, they've got to learn how to bring it in and learn what those markers are. And if you weren't trained at this airport, if you were trained at this airport, you've been drilled into your head the railroad tracks and certain points. So the board is working on it. The airport manager is working on it, and the pilots on the field have been working hard on this because this isn't how we want to spend our time. And so there is a lot of motivation to get this addressed and resolved. And on the complaints and the specific complaints, I'll just go ahead and take this opportunity to say, take what you're thinking and saying and apply it to a motor vehicle. And we have the same, we've got lanes, we've got space, but it is still transportation, and it is still a mode of transportation, and then it is heavily regulated in its own right. And There are conditions, and we do have a lot of conditions here with the mountains and the wind and the density, altitude, traffic in the pattern. We do have a lot of things going on at our airport, but we do hear you, and we are working on it. And so it may not seem that way. Apologize if it seems that way, but we are. And Levi has been working diligently to get a communication plan. I still believe education is really the biggest hammer we have in our toolbox, is to educate people and give them that site picture and give them the information about the area and the noise sensitive areas. So we are working on it. We do appreciate people talking about it, and we aren't opposed to hearing what's going on and what your experiences are. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say about noise abatement or the airport manager? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Levi, I just had a question from a sense of the agenda here. If we were talking about efficacy of the noise abatement program, is this a good time for you now, or do you want to hold off and get to that in a bit?
I suppose we could talk about it now, right? Yeah, it's not a breach of. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't mind waiting if you wanted to introduce it.
No, I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make a general comment, and then maybe you can kind of shed more light on kind of where the checklist is going. I hear that and appreciate that there are a lot of things being done and efforts being made to educate, and I think really the key is not the breadth, but the depth and the impact. And so what we really want to think about is what's the most effective way to communicate this, and are we doing that, and are we focusing on those? Because we could do everything and anything and create stamps that say this is what the VNAP means, but that's not the effective way to reach people and make sure that they know what the proper procedures are. So I just want to know, like, how do we evaluate what's working and what's not from a communication standpoint? And if you're going to get to that in a bit, happy to kind of hold that question, but that's what I'm most curious about here.
No, I can talk a little bit to that. And of course, with any time you have a program which is voluntary in nature, it becomes a little bit harder to standardize and measure efficacy of things like that.
No, sorry. You can measure the efficacy of a voluntary program just as you can measure the efficacy of a required program. You're just measuring different things.
So things that we're focusing on are little things like this. So a checklist. So there's something we can actually physically hand to somebody can go through, and they can sign and they get back to you. So then you can actually have physical proof. You go, okay, yes, you have seen this, you saw it, you signed it, came back to you. As far as individual pilots go, now you're really kind of getting into something that's a little harder to track. Flight schools are easier, businesses are easier, individual pilots are harder. So the best way to get into them, and keep all this in mind, this is all from best industry practices. So this is other airports that I've worked at where we've instituted voluntary noise abatement programs. These are constant conferences, classes, stuff like this. The things that we're pursuing or what have been fleshed out as being the most effective. So when you look at the communication plan, for example, those are all things that have been fleshed out as effective ways of communicating with the community and with pilots in general for moving forward with a voluntary noise abatement program. Now, if we're going to want to increase the effectiveness, we certainly can. As the old adage goes, all it takes is money. So we could do videos, we could pump a bunch of money into our website. I highly recommend a really robust, strong website when it comes to introducing this stuff. It seems to be how the information is shared the best.
So just to jump in for a sec, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. What's the best way to share this information? I don't want us to create a video if it doesn't work, if it's not going to be helpful. I don't want you to do 15 things if only 2 of those are the most effective. So that's actually exactly what my question is. What is proven in the industry from your experience and from what's out there, and recognizing that the efficacy of practices might have changed in the last decade with different technologies of communication. So what is actually the most effective, not just what is being done?
And going back to, again, the not the checklist, but the communications plan we got. So if you look at that communication plan, and unfortunately I don't have it here, top of it, kind of the things towards the top of that are more of the important stuff. So actually getting to the flight schools, getting the posters up, getting the website out, and stuff like that. There's some stuff on that checklist that isn't quite as effective. Signage on airports has proven could be not quite as effective. People are focusing on other things when they're flying, stuff like that. We still have that. But yeah.
Is that like the one that was posted on the runway that we saw the other?
Yeah, like the one that's posted on the runway, ones that are posted on the fuel pumps and everything like that too. So those are nice, and those are ways to potentially catch additional people. But we put most of our attention in our communication plans now into an implementation checklist, our posters, our website, stuff like that. That's really what's kind of fleshed out as being the most effective ways. And when we have these discussions, when we have these classes, when we talk about it in our groups and our roundtables at the conferences and stuff like that, it goes back to a lot of that communication. A lot of stuff's focused around websites. A lot of things are focused around public relation initiatives. Very similar when I got a really great comment about the Good Neighbor Award. The high-end advisor in this room, he said, "Oh my God, all airports should do this. This is great." So things like that, anything which draws attention, even things which anybody can get behind, and kind of have a positive attachment to, that's going to be your higher effective. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if this will help, but I was just looking for the information on ForeFlight, and it's either in the remarks, it may be in a chart supplement. I know when I was doing research, I
The chart
struggled
supplement.
to find information. And then airport website is the third place they tell you to go look for noise abatement.
Yep.
Content packs, pilot comments, either pilots commenting about the airport on ForeFlight, and then I think of pilot comments in the air that I know somebody out here does when they see somebody flying a fat pattern or doing something that's wrong. They'll call them out on the radio, and I've certainly heard it. I don't think I've ever had it, but I've certainly heard other pilots calling out aircraft in the moment and educating them, and it's usually a flight instructor that's doing that. So they do say the remarks, but some of this information is tough to find. You've got to know that you're looking for it. If you're just scanning for information about the airport, you're looking for runway length and so what are the comms and things like that. And then I think the problem is you do have to dig, and you do have to dig for landing fees. There's details like that you really have to dig, and which means you usually anticipate that you're trying to find something that you believe is there, and if you're not seeing it, it must not be there, and so you move on. So I know I've flown into airports where I was not aware that they had a noise abatement procedure.
In our airport, we
I know
announce
I've
it on the
definitely done
AWAS.
it. Yeah, so it is announced on the AWAS, and that is actually, because you need that information to come into land, to change your altimeter, get the weather, and that I would vote that that's the most effective place we can put it, but it's just we only have that much time because you got to repeat that, and so having it on there then leads them to go look and find it. And then you've got it printed out in the FBO as well, right?
Yes, there's several
Okay.
posters
Yeah.
around and in the flight schools also.
Okay. And probably maybe some new signage at the pump, things like that.
And there's
But the
signage at
AWAS
the pump also.
Yeah, so the AWAS for inbound, and even if they're not even going to set their wheels down, they need to listen to the AWAS. So they do get it there, but they do have to go look for it. There's just not enough time on the AWAS to explain anything. So, but good point in that, yeah, we don't need to do 100 things if only one's really good. I think there's not one single effective method, but a multitude. Again, that layering and that education, that repetition, getting it out there. And then as you have people in the pattern, you can see ahead of you what people are doing. And if you're way outside the railroad tracks, you need to be bringing it in. That's part of it as well. And again, different phases of flight, different weather conditions, different flight abilities. And students are always, just like student drivers, they're always going to be the ones that are struggling to get it right and learning how to get it right. So they may be trying and they may be really well educated and they still can't hold it, and can't hold it on the center line either. So that's why we have to practice, practice, practice. I hope that helps. And I think the AWAS, actually, in talking about it, is the first line of attack. And then they may come out and bumble it the first time and then go back and look when they're back on the ground. But coming into the pattern isn't when you can start digging through ForeFlight and looking for it. So, but at least that's bringing the awareness. So that's a good point.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to react with one comment there. So I'm hearing some slightly contradictory things across the comments here, which is the information's hard to find. We're doing a lot of things, and then we don't have enough time in the AWAS to actually communicate the whole thing, so then people have to go dig for it. I totally respect and understand that it can be complicated to communicate. You have to prioritize certain things at certain moments. But that to me suggests we haven't figured out what the optimal way to communicate this is, if it's hard to find in different places. And I think that's the entire spirit. If public safety notifications to the aviation community were hard to find, if they were not existent, if they were like snippets and not the full picture, wouldn't we be trying to figure out what the most effective way to communicate those is? Like, I know that that's a real-time conversation versus like something that's more static and that you kind of learn over time. And I'm not saying we have to find perfection here, but if that's the main tool we have in this camp, and we're trying to figure out how to solve or mitigate that issue, then I really don't want us to do a multitude of things if we know that only 5 are the most effective. Let's spend our time and effort on that, but also not make it hard to find, and make sure that we're thinking about this and spending Levi's time and everyone else's time, even pilots' time, in the right moments, thinking about the right things that they need. And I'm just not hearing that from the discussion. And maybe that's my ignorance here as not being a pilot, but I'm not hearing that from the discussion that we are anywhere close to the optimal approach here.
So I can address that. A year ago, we didn't have a notification on the AWAS. So we do need to be given time to get this done and to accomplish things. We had no notice on the AWAS, just warned about skydiving, and we didn't have these complaints a year ago. This was not a problem in the past years, and so it's become a problem. It's up full on the radar, so we're addressing it. And there, again, it's a multi-layer approach. It's not saying that there's a single source of ways. When you pre-flight from home, you're using ForeFlight, maybe looking some stuff up. We have a directory that the state provides that has a little bit more information. I rely on that. So we have 5 different things we look at when we're pre-planning a flight. And so we are proposing 5 different places that we put this information. For that reason, you don't have a single source of information. Most use ForeFlight, not everybody does. You don't have to, and that's a tool. And the AWAS is something you do need to dial into to listen to for your own safety. It's not required at our airport, but any controlled airport, you have to have a code to deliver that you listen to it. And so that is why I say that's the most effective place. But mostly, this is a new problem for us to be wrestling with, and we are working on it, and we are trying to identify. So I think that's part of it, is right now we're in an experiment phase. He's been doing a lot of work. We've been making a lot of changes, but it will take a little bit of time to see changes, I do believe. We do need a little bit of time to get these things out there and get it beaten into everybody in a way, just like when you train a dog or a child or anything else. And when you're learning, again, just think about when you were learning to drive. You know, you didn't parallel park, you didn't nail it on the first one, even though you were told how to do it. Did you? Okay. I don't remember. It was too long ago. So yeah, we're in a process, and this is new territory for us. We've had, especially the voluntary noise abatement plan has been there, but it hasn't been as widely discussed, and we haven't had as much public comment until just recently. So it is a work in progress, and we're still exploring and trying to figure it out. And we won't know if we don't try.
Anything else?
Just to embellish a little bit on what you were saying, most pilots, when they're training at a specific facility, airport, whatever it happens to be, go to the airport directory. And that's got a description, but the description is typically follow departure and arrival procedures and also follow noise abatement. But it doesn't really tell you what those things happen to be. That's kind of tribal knowledge within the airport. And a very good source, which I just recently looked up, is the city's website. So if you Google Vance Brand procedures, it'll give you arrival procedures, it'll give you departure procedures, it'll give you airport noise abatement procedures. So these are tools that are available, but they're not first training when you're taking your private or whatever your certification happens to be. But they're there.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, go ahead and hit your button. There you go. And you are...
Red. So am I correct in understanding that we're at item 6 now, information items, Vance Brand, noise abatement?
Yes, technically,
Okay,
I think.
so-
Yeah.
So I've given this some thought, and so I've got some comments and some questions. This will take a few minutes. I've got about 5 minutes here, so bear with me. So I've been listening to City Council on this as well. So at the May 20th, a lot of this you know, but just to give context, at the May 20 City Council meeting, councils commented they have heard questions about the efficacy of the airport noise abatement program. So there was a City Council motion on May 20th to ask the board, us, to evaluate the current program, which I think we're doing right now. Also, you read the comment from Councilman Popkin about this. So bottom line, council wants us to explore ways to increase the reach and efficacy of the noise abatement program and consider the entire ecosystem when we do this. Sorry for the redundancy, but I'm trying to build this. So if I may, I'd like to expand a little on this program and look at it from a new board member, non-pilot, citizen resident focus, kind of outbound in the private industry. You're either outbound focused or inbound focused. So I like working outbound, so that's kind of where I'm here, and try to look at it from the resident's point of view. And we'll let the others talk a lot about education, which I think is key. But, you know, are you going to measure how well you educated the pilots? Are they going to check off the list? Are you going to quiz them? Because I know self-reported data is sketchy at best. So my input and questions will be a little different from what you've been discussing, and it looks at parts of the noise abatement ecosystem that have not been addressed yet. So the city manager and the city council say they want to be data-driven, and we hear a lot about that, but we also hear a lot about opinions and stuff. So I'm guessing, since most of you are pilots, I think you can relate to data pretty well. So let's see if we can use data here, and if we don't have the data, I'd like to ask that we go get it. So I'd like to look at this program in 2 parts, break it down in 2 parts. First, as the program's name states, we're trying to abate noise or reduce noise. And so to be effective in any program, you need to measure what you're trying to do. So we're trying to measure noise, or we're trying to abate noise, and I'm suggesting we measure noise. So my questions are we actually measuring noise with the program? Are we measuring leaflets that get pointed out and stuff like that? Sorry to be flip, but I think as Councilman Popkin pointed out, we're doing a lot of things, but I don't think we're really measuring the thing we're trying to abate. So what noise measurements do we have to help us understand if we're being effective in abating noise? So I understand that measuring noise is technical, it's not intuitive, it's measured on a log scale, done a lot of it. I've been in product development, so I know what noise is, I know how to measure noise, and I know we can do it, so I know it's possible. So we don't have a residential noise measurement standard now. I'd like to ask, what will it take to get those so we can understand if our noise abatement efficacy, as requested by the City Council, is being effective? So that's one point. Today, we're using complaints to measure our noise abatement program, other than talking about how many different awards have been given out or how many flyers or where these signs are posted. When I asked about how we actually measuring, what are the metrics to understand if we're being effective in our noise abatement program, I was told that we are measuring complaints as a measurement of our efficacy. So let's look at complaints as a metric of our efficacy. So for every complaint, there are multiple others that are frustrated or disturbed by the complaint. But many don't complain for a wide range of reasons, especially when residents are dealing with city government, where there's already a ton of frustration and apathy. So from some basic research and a ton of professional experience in the industry and dealing with customers and satisfied customers and unsatisfied customers, there's a lot of data on this. So here's the data point. For every customer complaint, there's an estimated 26 other unhappy customers who have remained silent. Only 4% of unhappy customers are estimated to actually complain. The rest choose to just be silent. Around 96% of unhappy customers don't complain directly. So those numbers are for private industry where I come from. I worked in consumer products, commercial products for 40 years in a wide range of things, and a lot of it was understanding customers, what they're happy about, what they're unhappy about, and dealing with things that they're unhappy about. So measuring complaints is very likely to lead to false conclusions on our efficacy. So we need to look at measuring noise directly to be data-driven, as council wants, as the city manager wants, and to assure the city council our efficacy and efficiency of our program. So that's another point. So let's look at how customers actually complain now. And I have to say it's gotten a lot better. Before it was a little bit intimidating, fill out a complaint log, register and all that, but I think that's changed. Even though the pop-up screen says you need to fill out a log and make create an account, when I clicked on it, you don't have to make an account. So I think that's improved quite a bit. You click a button, I want to make a complaint, make a complaint, do you want to follow up, yes or no? So kudos, I think that's streamlined a lot. So people, it's a less onerous and less burdensome, but I do think we should get rid of that pop-up screen where you need to create an account and all that stuff. I think that's a little burdensome, maybe even intimidating to some. I just clicked on a few other sites, our sites. I know we're all consumers. We go on websites to complain about stuff or do warranty, and we know the drill there. But even our website, when you want to make a complaint for code enforcement, I click through and, you can make a phone call. It's quick and easy, and I don't think we have that. So I think we should add a phone call that we can do. I was on the site last night. I didn't see make a phone call. So maybe I missed it, but I think you ought to be able to do this anonymously, click a button, make a phone call. That way I think we can make the complaints easier to make and get clear data. Now I know that it needs to be anonymous and you get characters out there that make 1 million phone calls. I think there's ways to screen for that and filter that crap out. So I just think, measuring efficacy by complaints, not a great thing. Making our website hard to make a complaint, not a good thing. So those are some comments I have on the noise abatement program. And I know it's a little different than what you've been seeing, but we are asked to look at the whole ecosystem, and I'm up here listening to pilots and people that have been in the industry, and I get where you're coming from, but I think we need to look at some other things. So, are we measuring noise? I don't think so. I think we should. I'm not asking us to do that. I'm asking simply, what would it take? It's not, can we go measure noise? I'd like, as a request, as a board member, to understand what would it take to start measuring noise from a residential noise standpoint. Not FAA, not airports, from a residential, regular person standpoint. So that's a request. I don't know if I had to make a motion to do that, or if that's just a comment in my broader comment section.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate your perspective, and we did have, so the FAA has noise numbers, and when we went through the Mile High Skydiving lawsuits, they came out and measured for the purpose of those lawsuits, and there was nothing violating. But it's a decibel. It's a decibel limit, not a, that's all they're measuring.
Yeah, I think I
So-
referred to that when I said that's an FAA standard. I'm talking about a consumer, customer, resident.
Yeah. So it would
From
need
from a customer standpoint. So when you're sitting in front of a computer or a consumer device, is it making noise? That's what I'm talking about. Not an average over 1 year, and not some other technical spec that really doesn't relate to people sitting in their backyard having a picnic. Peaks, valleys, there's a bunch of ways to do it, but those numbers, I think, were FAA standard type numbers, and they were
For,
over average of a long
Well, it
period
was
of
just,
time.
are they breaking this upper limit?
Yeah.
And it wasn't about, and it was measured outside of the airport. I imagine they measured on the airport as well, but it was measured outside the airport. The judge actually that resided over those cases had it measured at her house, and she's out on Trevarton off of 75th or 95th, whatever, or 65th, way out there. And so they measured at her home. Part 150 study is it's a multi-million-dollar project, and that, while it sounds wonderful, it's an incredible expense. But I know we can always ask. There's no penalty for asking.
Great.
And
So
to
if
get
I
the
may comment on
information,
that.
yeah.
So I'm not asking, are we breaking any rules? I'm trying to understand, are we being effective in abating noise? So is our noise going down? Is it going up? Let's put whether we're breaking rules aside and just say, we're being asked, are we being effective with our noise abatement program? And we really don't have a measurement for that.
Mm-mm.
Is it leaflets being handed out? Sorry, I'm being flipped. Is it complaints? I don't think either one of those are fair, good, solid metrics to see if our noise is going up or down. And let's try to stay away from judges and FAA studies and just what would it take to measure our noise and where is it going? So that's the request.
Okay. Can you speak to that?
Was there a question?
Just
What would it take to measure noise?
I can speak from my personal experience. 2017, I was part of a initiative which we were thinking about putting a noise in monitoring around Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, which was going on at that time. That we kind of went through that process. It was going to be about $5 million, with about $1 million after that to maintain that program. Of course, that kind of goes back to the old adage: is all it takes is money to do that. If you want actually something to come out of that, it needs to be standardized. So if you really want to have any weight behind it, it needs to be something that which is kind of approved and or monitored by the FAA. Over the course of the years, there have been some airports that have done their own noise monitoring, kind of, if you will, with ad hoc equipment and stuff like that. Still tends to be an expensive venture. And the question ultimately becomes is, what is the benefit out of that? What is the scientific behind that? And again, it all goes down to, setting up a proper program, hiring good companies, and doing stuff like that. And of course, if we're just doing that without having any other authorities involved, it's purely for our own, own data collection, and it wouldn't be something that you could potentially use in a 150 study or anything like that also.
Yeah, I'm looking at for our own benefit. I'm not looking at FAA. I'm just, council asked, what's our efficacy? It's like, noise is the issue. Are we being effective at reducing noise? I don't think we know. And I don't think we're going to be able to know until we start measuring it. And if you start throwing FAA and studies and multi-million-dollar things at it, yeah, it's gonna fall on its face. But times have changed. I mean, I know this is not what you're talking about, and people will laugh at that. But technology is advancing at a tremendous rate. So I'm not really asking what did it cost 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or what did this airport do? It's like, what would it take to do some kind of method to measure noise?
Well, I would put that back to the airport board. What recommendation would the airport board have for that?
I think you need to know what it would take before we can make a decision. It's kind of this circular thing. It's like, if you're going to buy a car, how much is the car? So I'm suggesting we measure noise. What would that take? It's not asking do it, it's asking to understand what would it take.
What would it take to measure the noise?
Yes.
Again, I'm not an audio specialist, so I would put that back to the board. Are you guys making a motion to make a recommendation to council or something? I'm kind of confused on where you're going.
I'm just asking what would it take. I'm not suggesting we do it. So maybe it's a motion of investigate technologies to measure noise to understand the efficacy of our program. That might be a motion. Sure, I'll make the motion. I've never made one, but let's give it a try. So my motion is for the airport manager to research what it would take to measure noise to understand the efficacy of our program. And this is not an FAA-sanctioned activity. Sorry, I'm just a dude from the outside coming in. But it doesn't have to be sanctioned. It has to be something that we believe, because we seem to be able to believe anything that anybody walks in this room and says. So I'd like to get some data, and I don't know if we believe it, but people are coming in and saying all kinds of things that may or may not be true. But I think we need data to measure the noise to see if we're being effective.
So, point of clarification here.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Let's see. There you go.
Thank you. I'm not disrupting the substance or intent of your motion. Just from a functional standpoint here, the Airport Advisory Board's role is to advise council, not to direct staff. And so
Okay.
I just want to suggest that if your intention here is to have the airport try to manage or establish a baseline or figure out what's possible to measure noise, that the motion should be intended to make a recommendation to council. It might feel circuitous, but still the intention would be to direct council or to advise council that this is something that would be helpful. Then if the board voted in favor of that, then council would take that recommendation and decide what to do with that. And so it sounds like the spirit of your motion, and you can correct the words and wordsmith this if you want, is to have the Airport Advisory Board recommend to council that council investigate ways to, or direct staff to investigate ways to measure or establish a baseline of noise from an efficacy standpoint.
Yes, I could add some clarity to that. You need baseline and you need variance from the baseline, but yeah.
And you're trying to understand if you can measure it, like how we can measure
Yeah,
it.
just and understand how to measure it. Not
Yeah.
to measure it, not to go.
You can work on whatever language you want there. I just wanted to make sure that
Thank
the
you.
process here was clear, because the Airport Advisory Board's role is not to direct staff, but it's
Thank
to
you.
direct council. Thank you.
Learning isn't going, but thank you.
We all are.
Okay, so should I try that again?
The intent is there. I think, do you feel like you're comfortable in the transcription? I feel like the transcription is probably fine. I have a lot of questions just about how you even start. So I think there's nothing keeping us as a board from you working with another board member or anybody else to establish like where are you going to measure, what are your points that you're going to measure, and get a framework of what we're asking for, thinking in terms of an RFP that I'd like to measure noise at these 6 locations and have it be an independent study, that kind of thing. I think it would need to be a little bit better defined and then to Matthew's point, to get a benchmark, because we've got that we weren't violating it, but we don't have any sustained data on, nobody's been measuring it, so we don't have a benchmark. So I think we as a board probably need to do a little bit of homework and then can come back to make that ask.
Okay.
Having a better picture of what we're asking for.
Okay.
And make that ask. But you do have a motion out. Do I have a second for that motion, which would be to investigate? If you'd like to reword it, you do have that opportunity.
Investigate, the motion is to investigate what it would take to put together I'll call it a rudimentary noise measuring system just for our city, not for FAA, to understand the efficacy of our noise abatement program.
Would anybody second that? Steve?
I was waiting for discussion.
I need a second before we can discuss.
Yeah,
And then we vote after that.
yeah, I'm not,
Nothing? Should we? No. Do I have a second? Don't have a second. Do you want to second it so we can discuss? Okay, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I can't second it because I'm not a voting member of the board. I was just going to say, if board members wanted to discuss, someone could second to allow for discussion. That doesn't mean you support the motion. That's not what a second means. Just from a process standpoint, I just wanted to clarify that for folks.
So if there's no second, then it dies and there's no discussion? So if you want discussion, you got to second it.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
yeah, I'll second it.
There we go.
Thank you, Steve. Discussion. You are.
Yeah. I don't think it'd be helpful at all. I think you're wasting a lot of money for nothing. If the noise levels came back high, are you going to dictate to a pilot in the pattern to reduce power? I think it would cause a lot more problem than the little bit of noise that an airplane makes. If people are so worried about noise, stop development where they're causing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cars. The city council has created all these apartments, thousands upon thousands. I don't hear anybody complaining about auto noise. I walk the airport. I hear cars more than airplanes. And when you have an airplane 1,000 feet up in the air in the pattern, you're just not hearing it. It's not that bad. I'm sorry, guys. It's not that bad. Yes, you elected to live by an airport. And the bottom line is, you don't like it, move. I hate to say that, but you elected to buy close to an airport. The bottom line is there's a lot more auto noise than aircraft noise.
Anybody else?
Can I respond to that?
Let's see, let me get Dan real quick. Hold on.
My overall objection is this. You can accumulate data, but you don't know what the quality of the data actually is based on whether or not participants, willing or unwilling, who are being measured are in compliance with the noise abatement procedures. If they're not in compliance with that, then your data is going to be skewed one way or another. So to me, yeah, you can accumulate data, but it's, like what Winston Churchill said, there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. And unless you can work your way through the statistics, they're really going to be meaningless. So that's my objection to this approach under that set of circumstances. You could hire somebody for 24 hours a day to stand outside with a dB meter and figure out what the noise levels happen to be, but you're not going to be able to accurately measure whether or not that noise that is being generated is from somebody who's complying with the noise abatement procedures around the airport. So that's the sticky portion of any sort of data that could be accumulated. You don't really know if it's any good. That's my comment.
Okay, your comment. This is not intended to be policing, and this would all be computers, so there will be nobody calling any pilots. This is a broad study. And your comment on it cost a lot of money. We don't know how much it'll cost because we don't have that data. That was my request. What would it take? And we're making assumptions that it's millions of dollars and it'll fail and it wasn't any good. We don't know. Those were years ago, and this is a different program. So I don't think we should be going on assumptions and beliefs. I think we should be going on facts. And that's what I'm asking for is what would it take? That means, how much resource, schedule resource cost, basic project management stuff, or scope. And so, I object to the comment that it'll cost millions and it'll be calling up pilots because there's no intention to spend millions and millions on this, and there's no intention to call up a pilot, just to be clear. Then back to you, you're saying we don't know if pilots are adhering to the noise abatement program. That's the problem. We don't know, and this would measure just what's the noise and what's the cause of the noise. Is it too many planes, or is it planes outside of the pattern? That's what we're getting to, and we don't know that. We don't know if pilots are adhering to this, right? There's no measurement, and that's what council's asking for is what is the efficacy of the noise abatement program? And from what I can tell, I want to say we don't have a clue, but that's kind of rude. We don't really know. I haven't seen anything in here and read anything that we know the efficacy of our program, and council is asking us to do that, and we don't have the means to do that. That's why I'm asking for this. Whether they're in or out of the pattern is kind of like, we don't know, we'll probably never know. I mean, you can look at the data and we can see when pilots are out of the pattern, but The noise is the issue. We don't know the efficacy of this program, so I'm just trying to come up with a simple way to measure it. It's not really measuring whether they're in or out of the pattern. So just to come back and address that. So,
Anybody else want to weigh in? It's good discussion. Again, to the points where you would measure, that would be key to where you gather data.
you bet,
know, where
there's
you-
lots of
where you do
detail
it,
there,
yeah.
for sure. And if we don't pass this, I would like the board to come back with a way to measure, to respond to city council. What is the efficacy of this program?
Which again, is going to take a little bit of time to see what's, we're moving into the highest flight season by being summer.
Do we have a goal
let's-
there? Do we know what we're going to measure? If you have efficacy, you're measuring something. What would
Yeah,
we be measuring?
complaints, as you know, it's been by complaints, so,
Okay.
yeah.
And we need to ask, I would go back to city council and ask them if they believe that that is the way to measure efficacy, if they believe that.
So let's vote on it, and then there's nothing preventing us as individuals to do homework, investigate things, and report back to the board. That is what I would love more than anything, is for people to go, either you can go work in a pair, and that's still okay with sunshine law, and come back to the board with with your recommendation of how to actually do it, how to, draw the picture of what it's going to look like, and if you can get any kind of pricing, but the city could look at that, and have a more concrete picture of what we're going to, what we want to do, to see what we can measure. So that would be, if this passes, that's what we will have to do as a board. And if it doesn't, we still can do that as individuals. There's nothing preventing us.
A clarifying point. I think if it passes, it would go back to council, and council would have to come back and say, this is how we think we would want to measure. Because the question is, what would it take to measure noise? And that request is going to council, right? That's what I think I understood from you, right? Councilman Popkin?
Just waiting to get stuck at the traffic light here. So it really depends on what the motion is. If I'm understanding what your intent of the motion was, right, you don't have to necessarily have the solution. If I understand what your ask was, it was to direct council to then ask staff to investigate what the options are for measuring noise. That's what I think I understood
Yes,
from that.
that
Please
is-
correct me if I'm wrong.
That was the intent, correct.
So in that case, you don't have to have the answers, you don't have to have the points, you don't have to know what the technologies are or the cost.
Right.
You can decide if that's information that you would like to have before making that recommendation. That's the board's decision. But I think that the reason why I shifted the process was just because the advisory board can't direct staff from an operational standpoint. Only council can direct the city manager to direct staff to do that. And so that was the process that this would follow if that's the direction the board wanted to go.
Last call. So the motion is to ask council to investigate a process to measure noise, so that we can measure the noise abatement program, the efficacy of it. It's been moved and seconded, and it's time to vote. So all in favor of asking council to look into this, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Nay.
So that fails. But again, that doesn't keep us from continuing to move forward
Thank you.
and come back with a, just keep moving the idea and
Okay.
working on it. So, all right. Action items. We're at number 7 still, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have any action items on it. So I guess we just go to public
Well,
right to be heard.
I do have one that I was going to ask you about.
Oh.
The rates and charges study. I know it's time to do that, and that is a way for us to review all the rates and charges at the field.
Yeah, so we, via kind of our rules and regulations, or actually, I think it's actually in the charter of the Airport Advisory Board, we review the rates and charges yearly. So that is something that's kind of been on our radar for a while. As we've been moving more recently into looking at new leases and stuff like that, I've kind of casually started having the conversation, certainly with city management, and then I'd like to reach out to some independent companies to see if we perhaps even get a rates and charges study done to make sure we're really crossing our T's, dotting our I's. To my knowledge, we've never had a rate and charges study done for this airport, at least for any of the research that I can find. It's always been kind of, as they said at the conferences is like you elbow your buddy at the other airport and say, what do you charge? And they elbow the buddy at the airport and say, hey, what do you charge? Instead of taking actual data, metrics, property values, cost needs into consideration. So that's a recommendation that I've made to my direct supervisor, and I'm currently speaking with a couple individuals to kind of get that priced out, what that would take.
So you're underway. That's good.
Yep.
What do you think the time frame would be?
I'll be speaking with the gentleman who is looking at our leases as directed by City Council next week. So I was hoping at that same time sit down and have a conversation with him and get a general idea of what certainly his company's timeline would be, and that should give us a general idea of what the industry can do. I would hope to have at least some preliminary information by the next meeting for that.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Any other action items? I think that we didn't have anything else on the agenda. If we're ready, we can go to our next public invited to be heard. Again, go ahead. Sorry, Matthew.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jordan. Board Member Schilling already brought up one of the two motions that council voted unanimously to direct the board on the 520 meeting. There was another motion, and I'm actually surprised that it hasn't come up yet, because I actually think it's the more important one. The council directed the Airport Advisory Board also to review current public safety notification and communications practices and recommend improvements. And so we don't have to do that tonight, but that is a direct and, in my opinion, immediate thing that we should focus on as a board, just given some of the recent concerns and the actual incident that happened there. So that was another, I don't know if that's going to fall under action items tonight in terms of to-dos or direct motions, but first of all, one, to make sure the board was aware of that. And secondly, I want to make sure that Levi and the airport team there are prepared to act on that and provide the board with enough information to help recommend improvements if needed.
I can give an update on that.
Great.
Thank you for mentioning that. I should have put that in my airport update. So that's something that kind of came out of the incident which occurred at the airport where we had a threat of a shooting. In my research, since I'm the one guy there at the airport, there wasn't really an airport emergency plan. Via the nature of it, it's pretty much just me, so I call the police is kind of what we do. But for future purposes, we've decided it's prudent to have a written plan. Fortunately, that's something that I've done several times in the past, so I wrote up a really quick airport emergency plan. I've got that off to city management already for their input and approval. I'm hoping to run that plan through the city's systems also, to kind of see what they're seeing, what kind of input they want to get, and out of that, we should have a good solid draft for an airport emergency plan.
I should stop turning off my mic. So that then would come to you're going to bring that emergency plan to the board then to discuss.
Yeah.
That's part of that city process to make sure to review. Great. I'll just add as you're working through that process to make sure that we recognize that not all, this incident being certainly an example of that, not all public safety incidents necessarily are handled by the City of Longmont Department of Public Safety. And so making sure that when there are multiple jurisdictions involved, or a jurisdiction involved, in this case Boulder County, that was not the City of Longmont leading the investigation, that the airport has a plan, that part of that emergency plan or communications plan factors those pieces in to still make sure that the communication notification process is still effective, even if it's not being handled by the Department of Public Safety for the City of Longmont.
And that plan covers several different incidences and then chains of notification on who should be notified and stuff like that too. So yeah, it's what just so far to my knowledge is my draft, and I shot it off to the safety folks and to Sandy. So hopefully they got that now. So hopefully we get some more input from that. But yes,
Great.
Absolutely.
And thank you. And truly the City Council looks forward to the board's advice and recommendation on that topic as well.
Yeah, that'll be a good item.
Thank you. I've got to admit, I'm incredibly disheartened by what has happened, and I don't have any confidence right now, because I tried to get an update from Boulder, from the sheriff, and there is no record of anything happening. There's no record with the individual. There's no record of the summons or an appearance. I called, I asked, I dug, I looked, and could find nothing to give an update as to where things stood. And so that's not talking about our communication plan. It's saying that, again, the whole picture is how do we get the right information to communicate, because we want to communicate accurate information that's legal to put out to the public and things like that. So we also, this was a new situation, relatively new. We did have another problem with the individual earlier, and we do have to involve the FAA, the FBI. It's a federal offense, and so I do get that there's other jurisdictions, but I would love to see us have a liaison with the governing body over the airport, which would be still the city of Longmont, and that we would have a victim's advocate or a liaison or an officer, a detective or an investigator that's working to get that information for us. And I think that's the piece that's missing. A member of the pilot community went to the DA and asked for an update, and they also were unable to find information readily, and then had the firebombing, and then had a murder trial that they were preparing for. So we're hoping to get something by the end of this week or by next week from the DA's office, just letting us know where things stand. So it is concerning, and I do write the emergency plan for the air show, and I have to communicate that to all the different levels. They all have to sign off on it. Just to kind of illustrate the depth of information for an air show, all those people have to be there. We brief with all the pilots that are flying, all my volunteers on the ground. It's quite a process, and it's unique to the air show environment. A lot of public, and the potential for a on-air field crash is always the worst case. And so we haven't had to deal with anything. We have not had a crash within the city of Longmont, a fatal crash. We've had some planes go down, but no fatal crashes. And so we have never, again, like the noise problem, we're covering some new territory. And I do also want to see us be able to evaluate a good plan and have all problems considered, worst case scenario, which is usually the one I go to. So I did hear council include that in our direction, and I think right now we're Levi's done his job, but I feel like I'm stymied on providing an update on the outcome of the problem that we just recently had. I'll say while I'm at it, for other things, the most reliable source of information for aircraft incidents and accidents is the National Transportation Safety Board, because they are the ultimate body who investigates and rules on planes, trains, ships, all the different things. So ntsb.gov, you can go look, and you can look by month and look at all the accidents that have happened and get their take on it. It is about a 2-year process for any crash. So we aren't here to armchair quarterback why people's planes came to a unexpected stop where they did. That's not our job, but it is other people's, and you can get that information that's official and unfettered and not opinion. I'm going by eyewitness for the things that I've experienced. And so this is a good conversation again. I think it's a very good conversation for us to have, and a safety plan is best to be had ahead of time. And then when all the adrenaline is flowing, you have something that you just systematically go through a checklist, just like we do when we're in flight. So that is something, again, that we just need a little bit of time to get it dialed in and discussed and make sure we haven't got any holes in it. So thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, to be clear, council wasn't trying to rush the board here. We want to make sure that what's developed makes sense. And so please take the appropriate time, Levi and board, to vet that plan and just make sure that it makes sense to move forward. And council looks forward to hearing from the board.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add on that topic? Sure. Go ahead. All right, then, now final public to be heard. 5 minutes, state your name and address, comments toward the board.
All right, round two, Matt Menza, 2235 Parkview Drive.
Right side, other side.
The other right?
Yep, other right, your other right.
Awesome. Matt Menza, 2235 Parkview Drive. Interesting comments tonight, questions, and a lot of good work by Levi trying to work with the community on that community engagement and education piece, and I think that's great. I think it's concerning, let me reword that. There's some noise tasking, these monumental chores of asking the city to do certain things that will require a lot of effort. From my extensive science background and aviation background, that's a huge chore. I think Steve and Dan had the appropriate pragmatic approach to that particular topic. A lot of work for zero effort. It's not going to solve or help what we're trying to do here in the community with the airport. And so I wanted to address a couple things. It is really frustrating for the pilot community to come out to listen to the same individual or individuals come here into city council week after week complaining about the airport. And you can only surmise from that the individuals only want one thing. They don't want coexistence. They want the airport to be shut down. And that is where the pilot community believes is very childish on many, many fronts. And so those words aren't uncivil. It's a description of the behavior that we believe is present by these as we call them, serial complainers. And so I want to address one of the topics that comes up often from these individuals. It's called the cost of the airport. I heard the term handout from the city and the taxpayers to the airport. Well, let's talk about that. I sent you, Matthew, an email. I don't know if it sounds like you shared it with Comrade Scott, because it sounds exactly like my talking points from that email. So I'll address that. If you want to invest in the airport and make it sustainable financially for the city, then you invest in it. And how do you invest in it? Not by a handout, but by private investment. And how do you get private investment? You have to incentivize the private investor to build and do business at the airport. This city has not done that in the time I've been here. For 20 years, from talking to the other pilots too, been here, they haven't done that. And how do you do that? Yes, when you build it, they will come. And how do you do that? With lease terms, with incentives to allow people to want to invest and build on that airport. There's been a very successful businessman locally. They wanted to put a restaurant on there. They were unable to do that because of the barriers to doing that. The lease terms that are offered to business people that want to do business out there are atrocious. And how do I know this? Because I was one of them. I was one of those private investors. My wife and I, 2.5 years ago, were going to buy the FBO. We had the purchase sales agreement done. We had the financing. We had the escrow transferred. And the city, after 3 meetings, gave us something that nobody would sign. My attorney laughed. I laughed. The bank laughed. And the city didn't, because I think they knew what they were doing. So that FBO has been up for sale for years. The individuals in Florida doesn't want anything to do with it, but can't sell it because of the city. So if you want a better FBO, talk to your elected officials, and let's get the elected officials to give a lease to a person like me or some other buyer that can buy that FBO and turn it into something great for the community. It's not that hard. There are millions of dollars that are available from the state and the feds to fund everything on that airport. But this city has done none of that. They have done nothing to go after that money. The last administration under President Biden had trillions of dollars for transportation. Every airport I go to in this country has new terminals, new runways, everything. They took advantage of that money. They did the paperwork. Their leadership put effort towards that. They got the money, and they have great airports, all free federal money. So if you develop, for example, the entire south side with good terms, good leases, and get businesses in there, it would pay for it overnight. Yes, you build it, they will come. That is correct. And yes, like a lot of city municipalities, they put money into infrastructure in order to ensure that somebody can have an opportunity to build there without the risk. FBO, let's talk about that. There's an underground tank. Nobody wants to assume the liability of that. The city is going to have to assume the liability of that. They're going to have to build an above-ground tank to comply with the new EPA and environmental rules. Somebody's going to private investors are just going to put $2 million into that and expect the city to accept no liability. No, that's not unreasonable, or that's not reasonable, and that's not how business works. Every city puts money towards infrastructure in order to get private investment to come. That's standard. We haven't done that in this airport. So we need to start doing that. You need to start talking to your elected officials, your city council, and your mayor to start doing that. You have to put a little bit of money into the infrastructure at that airport in order to get it to pay back to the community tenfold, 20-fold, 30-fold. My business plan that we had was going to double the fuel sales overnight. Triple, quadruple. That means the associated tax revenue going to the city. This is not a hard problem. We just need leadership. This is not a hard problem. If the argument is it's a drain on the taxpayer, then easy, fix it. And we can do that with investment in the airport. And do you budget a little bit for the airport from the city in order to put that infrastructure in there in order to be able to do that? Absolutely. That's normal. But the cause and effect, the secondary effect is more revenue to the city long term, a better community center, a better airport, and the tertiary effects are our small businesses, which can't be overemphasized. So it's time we start looking at reality and looking at pragmatic approaches. You bought underneath an airport. Airport activity has a right to be an airport. It identifies as an airport, it will be an airport, it would act like an airport. And people have to coexist with that. And if you want to grow the airport and you want to complain about the cost, then develop the airport. But I was one of those private investors, and I know a whole bunch of other ones, and they gave me a lease that nobody would ever sign because the city assumed no risk, and they gave me no flexibility, or any investor any flexibility, or any liability, or any incentive to put their investment into that city to have it pay back or be stable or be secure. The risk was all on me and not on the city, and it was terrible. Again, all over the country I go to airports. John just went to 18 of them. And they don't behave like us because they have leaders that put money and put time and give incentives for private businesses to come out there and invest and build. And nobody wants to invest and build here because the city council and the mayor have purposely, and the city managers have purposely made it impossible to do so. So let's stop complaining about what we can fix and fix it. If the problem is money being a drain, then when you build it, they will come. And the secondary effect is money to the city. Super easy. Elections are coming up. Let's start voting for people who want to do the right thing and exercise some leadership. Thanks.
Rickety, so let me come down slowly. Ed C. Judd again. I had an agenda that I was going to follow, but if you don't mind, I'll just respond to some questions that were raised tonight. I was a lawyer here in this town for 38 years, so I kind of approach problems the way a lawyer does. For the last couple of months, I've been researching the issues that have been discussed here. And I've been reading legal opinions that all deal with the same issues. The most recent is the Town of Superior and Boulder County versus Jeffco. I have the opinion if somebody wants it. This isn't a new problem. Every airport in the country has the same problems. And so if you want to know how to solve a problem, you look around and see what others have done. And in the cases that are in this particular decision, they address the issues that have been decided in the city of Burbank, California. There's another in New Jersey. The problem you have isn't concerning a grandiose problem. The problem that I think you have is that you don't have information in critical areas. The gentleman who just spoke started by saying he'd been around the airport for 19 years and had never seen anything unsafe. Well, if you're on the grounds of the airport, that's probably true. But if you're not around the grounds of the airport and you're looking someplace else, you're going to see that it is true. The problem I think that needs to get addressed is where are the complaints coming from? I believe from what I've read so far over the last 2 months that you're not going to get anywhere with the measuring sound levels, because I think it's 65 decibels over 24 hours, none of which is measured within 300 feet of a road. That's been done in many, many cities, and millions of dollars have been spent, but it doesn't solve the problem in the final analysis. What's going to help solve the problem is figure out where the complaints are coming from in the community. And you can do that, I believe, with the measure that you were talking about, Mr. Schilling. It doesn't require science, it just requires looking at the addresses and figuring out where your problems are coming from. And then you have to isolate who's causing the problems, because for the 36 years that I've lived by this airport, there really weren't problems. There was this kerfuffle with skydiving, 14 years ago. But I would like to volunteer to work with you. I've done some research. I can perhaps bring a perspective to this that maybe you wouldn't otherwise find, because I live in the community that's affected. My understanding of the function of government is that its function is to mediate the interests of all the parties, the investors in the airport and the community itself. The issue, for instance, that was raised by one of the members, that you shouldn't buy a house near an airport because you assume the risk of what's going to happen, that's been argued all over this country. And there is an answer, and the answer is that when the airport grows and the community grows next to it, it creates a land use issue. And that land use issue is going to affect you in the future when you want to expand the airport. Because if there's a problem, you're going to have to address it. I think the problem that you face here is a small problem involving a few flight schools over a limited area, and it could be solved easily by leaning hard on those who are causing the problem. I've researched a lot of remedies. And if I had more time, I'd go into them with you, because I've been considering what happens if the airport management and the board does nothing. I have an idea of what I'm going to do myself, and it gives me some insights into what you can do about the same problem. If you want to use me, I'm available to try to help. Ivan has my address. He has all my contact information. I'd love to be a help, both to the pilots and to the community. We've lived together for a long time.
Could you spell your last name?
Sejud.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Edward's the first name. Thank you.
Scott Store, 229 Grand Street. It's actually interesting listening to the talking point earlier about trying to monitor noise within the community. Actually, it's not just me sitting up here flapping my gums. I might be the one who's, willing to stick my neck out and put my name on the line or what have you, but there's many people. There's a gentleman named John who looked into this a while ago. He sent it to me. He's never presented it, but data points for tracking: date, time, airport identification number, airplane longitude, latitude, airplane altitude, airplane decibels. He's got a list of 10. Larson Davis, Casper, Enviro Suites, Noise Meters, Inc., Cirrus Research, GeoNoise. He's got a list of 10 companies that do exactly what one of the board members was asking, to the point where he asked, a group of us, if we can get this going, would you guys put a monitor in your yard? Yeah, what's the cost? Less than $250. I'm willing to pay that. I'll be a part of the study. You can put the monitor in my yard. We just need approval and somebody, honestly, not even somebody to pay for it, because I think the greater community as a whole that's affected will pay for it. I can appreciate the passion that comes from a previous speaker. If you build it, they will come. Here's the reality. They're building it. Rocky Mountain's already building it. Crosswind runways, longer runway, with a better FBO, all of that stuff, 20 miles south. Fort Love, they're building it. Same thing, crosswind runway, bigger stuff. You know, Fort Love's got what, $27 million requested for the FAO over the next couple of years for grant monies. They're building it because they bought 900 acres away from everything in order to try to create an airport that they believe was going to serve their community. They stopped using that airport that was north of town, and they stopped using it from, you know, what we heard from a board member before is because that land was more valuable within the city. A little bit disappointed in some of the other stuff that was said. You know, a little bit of noise from airplanes. It's not a little bit of noise. You guys wear headphones. Take off your headphones. I don't wear headphones in my backyard. It's not a little bit of noise. If you don't like it, move. Let's not be bullies. We're better than that. You elected to live near an airport. I elected to live in a quiet residential street that wasn't near a busy road, that doesn't get the noise. I don't hear I-25 from my house. I don't hear 287 from my house. I don't hear all of that because I elected to purchase a home in the old part of town that is away from all of that. Motor vehicle comparison. Vehicle is regulated. Cruising is regulated for a vehicle. If you circle more than 3 times in the city, it's considered cruising, and you get pulled over for it. It's regulated. Fuel's regulated for cars, if we're making the car comparison. Emissions is regulated for cars, if we're making the comparison. It's really a bad comparison because airplanes don't compare. There was something earlier that was spoken about. The pattern's too tight. The pattern map that was presented to the city council the other day, I agree, it's tight, and it's not a quarter mile to a half mile. It's a half mile to 3/4 mile. You have to be 700 feet before you turn downwind. You know, it's written, and I'm sure these people that you all know this. If that pattern is not achievable with the aircraft, as was stated earlier, we got bad data that we're trying to build something on. It's not good. This community is supported by some great airports. One of them is DIA, one of them is Rocky Mountain, one of them is Fort Love. For the smaller stuff, which is what this airport was back in the day, it's Longmont Airport. But we're trying to create an industry here, and the city doesn't need that industry. It's a nice thing for the airport community, but like I say, 20 miles south, 20 miles north. I'm not trying to shut down the airport, but stop trying to shove an industry down our throats. We live here. Thanks for your time.
Where to start? I don't think anybody's trying to shove industry down our throats. I think we're trying to make the airport a better part of the community. But I'd like to address a few of the specific things real quick. First of all, Matt was talking about private equity investment in the airport. The FAA has said that they would have funded when the land that's at the end of runway 11 departure that we had the whole Modern West thing with. The FAA said if they had known, they would have given us the money to purchase that land. The house that's at the other end of the runway, when it went up for sale originally, the previous airport manager said the city didn't look at purchasing it, and the FAA said, oh, well, for $650, which is what it went for at that time, we would have given you the money to purchase that to eliminate that as a potential conflict with the airport. There's, and as Matt Menza said, John Grunsfeld, as Matt Menza said, over the last 4 years, there's been, I think it was 20 or 25 billion for small airport terminal programs. And so an example of not shoving industry, a terminal program would give us a place where there could be a restaurant, where there could be community rooms, community hangars for St. Vrain School District, really turning the airport much more into a community airport. I'd like to switch over to noise abatement because, there was good discussion. I'm glad we had that discussion. As I said, I was at Centennial today. At the end of the runway, there's a sign. It's like, 4 feet by 3 feet, and it says noise abatement procedures in effect. We ought to have a sign at each end of the runway so that when visitors come, they know that there's a noise abatement procedure in effect. And, I don't know what that would cost. Levi can estimate it, but signs are relatively inexpensive, and it outlines, sometimes they outline a few of the first steps of that. Again, I've talked to Levi about this. My personal opinion only is that our AWAS, what pilots listen to as they're approaching the airport, should say, noise abatement procedures in effect, avoid touch and go operations from dusk to dawn. Something like that. And, Levi and I have had that discussion about what you can and can't say, but we say avoid overflight operations when parachute operations are in effect. That's a safety thing. I have been to airports that specifically say avoid touch and go operations, and they sometimes have times, sometimes they say dusk to dawn, sometimes they say Long Beach, touch and go operations are prohibited at night. Now that's a big step. That involves the FAA approving that statement, but just saying. We talked about available resources. Student pilots hopefully are going to the airport flight directory because they are required to research every available source of information about the airport before they fly here. Now, the word every is impossible, but nevertheless, this is an FAA standard thing. It's actually a book, but all of the online tools have it that we have in the cockpit. Noise abatement procedures in effect. Contact airport manager 303-651-8431. That's completely ineffective. Somebody's going to read that, they'll call, they get Levi's voice, it says please leave a message. We should say in there the website, the city website, full URL, and we can even add a few of the things, that are in our noise abatement. So I think we ought to do that. I think, Levi, at our quarterly airport meetings in the community room at the airport, you ought to go over the noise abatement procedures. Except we haven't had meetings and we don't have a community room. So my recommendation is schedule quarterly meetings, and it can be with the LOPA, it can be with the EAA, but it ought to go out to your full distribution, and we ought to have meetings and talk about all the issues. Mr. Schilling, the project that you propose is a very viable project. What we do with it, is a whole nother can of worms. I recorded an hour of audio with a NIOSH sound meter on the airport, and it was really interesting. I reported at a previous AAB, but airplanes were the least frequent and least loud things in my hangar, which is on the north side of the airport. But, if you wanted to take a first step, I think a high school student at the tech center could do a one-semester project, because all of the software to enable a machine learning tool to identify sounds is open source. They combine that with a little Raspberry Pi computer with a microphone, and they teach it to classify sounds and the sound levels. You can combine that with an ADS-B receiver, and it can then identify airports that are within a quarter mile of the airport to separate it from airplanes flying over. just today when I was pre-flighting, the loudest things I heard were Airbuses descending into Denver by far. But anyway, so that's a reasonable project without having to go and spend $1 million as a start. And then finally, I was a little alarmed to hear that we didn't have that the Longmont Airport didn't have an emergency response plan. Hopefully we have an incident response plan. We ought to have a safety management system that includes a whole series of things. I've personally been out at the airport when a parachute didn't open and a parachutist perished. There ought to be a response. It's not up to Mile High. When somebody dies on the airport, we ought to have an airport incident response. And that generates a call to the NTSB, and maybe we did, I don't know. But, there ought to be stuff in progress. And I was also very alarmed to hear that we don't know about the shooter status. So anyway, thanks very much again. Thank you for, I know this is a volunteer job. I really do appreciate all of you spending your time doing this. Thanks.
The shooter was charged today.
Hi, good evening. Tara Menza, 2235 Parkview Drive in Longmont. And I would like to whatever noise mitigation studies you're going to be doing, I would hope that the cars that are highly regulated in Longmont that also wake me up out of a dead sleep in the middle of the night when my windows are open don't count against our airplanes, because the screeching cars are obnoxious. And if we should be complaining about something, it should be those cars that wake people up in the middle of the night. I can't be the only one that it wakes up. Yes, safety plan. Definitely need some kind of way to communicate to the people who fly in and out of Longmont Airport if there are people who could be endangering the lives of our pilots. And it doesn't matter if it's not in our jurisdiction, it affects the users of the airport. So it has to come from the airport itself, or the city, the person who owns the airport. If we had a good FBO, those people would help get that information out to the pilots who are flying in and out of the airport. So yes, a good safety plan and communication plan to help keep our pilots safe is definitely needed. So thank you. Thank you guys for all you do. Appreciate it.
Would our police officers like to speak? You guys have patiently sat through all of this. That is the last call. Jeremy? Anybody? This is the last call. All right. I will close public invited to be heard, and I'd open up number 9, which is comments from board, staff, and council.
I didn't have to go first if someone else wanted to go, but I will speak to a few things here. First, I wanted to thank Levi for giving me an informal but appreciated tour of the airport last week, and talking through some of the kind of history of some of the facilities, the updates to some of the buildings, the lack of updates to some of the facilities, and some of the challenges of doing that as well. Did want to direct, there were a couple references to the city council meeting on May 20th, where the 2 motions that we discussed earlier were sent over to the airport advisory board. I also wanted to direct folks, I know that at the last airport advisory board meeting, which I was not there in person, but did watch after, the chair sent at direction of the board a letter on landing fees and the board's opinion and recommendation on that. Thank you for that. We all received that. There was a discussion just last week on June 3rd on some of the landing fee conversation. I know Chairwoman Jordan was present for that, as were some other people who are here. If you are interested in, and if you have not watched that conversation and are interested in it, it was a long meeting, so I'll give you the time it starts at. It was 3 hours and 49 minutes in. So I suggest you just jump to that point, unless you're interested in some of the other topics on the agenda. More direction on that will be forthcoming. There was some discussion and direction to staff on what to bring forward to the board for additional consideration there. I don't really feel like I need to address a lot of the comments made tonight. I'll just note that from a clarity standpoint, the 2 motions that were made on 520, The first was about the efficacy of the public safety notifications, as I mentioned before. In process, I appreciate that staff is looking into that and working on that, as well as the board is going to consider that. The other one was on the efficacy of the communication for the voluntary noise abatement program. So I just want to make sure that the board does think about that going forward on how you want to respond to that. Again, council is genuinely interested to know what we think is what are the most effective strategies, and maybe beyond that, just how effective the current strategies are. Just an acknowledgement of some public comments that I heard. I do get emails from a lot of folks, and I feel like I can make a movie about it because I get emails on planes, trains, and on automobiles from people on noise. And let's just say we have programs to working on the trains. There are regulations in place, at least in theory, whether they're enforced or not, on automobiles. And we have a program on planes. And that's the tool that we have, and so that's what we have. That's what the direction was, to just make sure that tool is working to its best of ability. And the last thing that Levi and I actually talked about when we were driving around the airport, we had an extended conversation about the airport master plan and how that hasn't been updated since when, 2012, 2011? 2012. And I think you said that was slated for the next round of funding to update that in 2028. Is that correct? Am I stating that correctly?
Yep. So to break down a little bit deeper than that even, so our next big project coming up is a Taxiway Alpha connector rehabilitation, which is the asphalt taxiway on the airport, if you will. It's the kind of the easiest way of thinking about that. And then after that, our next chunk of money that we're getting is going towards a master plan.
And that's the chunk of money currently slated from the FAA, is that?
Yep.
And that's scheduled in 2028. That's how that works.
Yes. Yep.
And then for further grant eligibility, there were some comments tonight and have been in multiple meetings about kind of leveraging federal dollars that are available for airport infrastructure. For further eligibility there, that is all contingent upon having an updated master plan. Am I understanding that process correctly?
That's the simplest way to explain it. Yeah, there's some intricacies to it.
What's the actual way to explain it?
So you have to have a current airport layout plan to be eligible for products. So your projects have to be on the airport layout plan. The airport layout plan is most generally included in a master plan. You can do them independently. It tends to be very expensive when you do them independently, and usually best business sense to do those two together.
So the most cost-effective way to get an updated airport layout plan is to do it as part of an updated airport master plan, which is currently scheduled for 2028 to leverage FAA dollars.
Yep.
And I think you quoted somewhere between $800,000 to $1 million for an updated plan.
I'm guessing it'll be around $1 million-ish.
In compliance with FAA standards for the master plan.
In compliance with standards. Of course, that's all subject to fair market value and how costs change between now and then.
Well, of course. And that timeline was just in aligning the master plan with federal dollars. There, you could do a master plan sooner if there were dollars made available from other sources. Correct?
Yeah, it's possible. Yes.
Okay. Cool. I just thought that would be helpful clarity for some folks. I know I learned a lot from that. Appreciated Levi taking it around, and I appreciate the board considering multiple topics tonight. Thank you.
Comments?
Anything else?
Anything else?
I'm good.
On that, we may adjourn. Good night.
Oh.